The starship Valiant drifted slowly through the dark stretch of uncharted space, its lights faint against the endless void. The crew inside moved about their stations quietly, each lost in their own thoughts. There were explorers, scientists, and military personnel all rolled into one, trained for encounters with worlds no human had ever set foot on before. Their mission was simple on paper: investigate a new planet on the edge of known space and report back any findings. In reality, they all knew it could be far more dangerous. No one spoke openly about the risks, but the word Deathworld had already circulated through the ship's corridors from the observation deck. Captain Alina Voss stared at the planet below. It was a swirl of dark green and gray, with thick clouds covering most of the surface. Satellite scans had detected a strong magnetic field, unusual gravity anomalies, and signs of life that didn't match any known patterns. The ship's sensors could barely penetrate the dense atmosphere, but the readings were enough to set off alarms in the minds of everyone who saw them. This was not a typical planet. It wasn't like the lush, habitable worlds they had studied before. Something about it screamed danger. Inside the command center, Lieutenant Harris ran his fingers across the console, analyzing the signals coming from the planet. "Captain, the readings are unusual," he said, his voice tight. "There's activity down there, but it doesn't match any civilian patterns. No agriculture, no organized cities like we've seen. These are fortified positions, maybe military installations." Captain Voss's brow furrowed. "Are you saying they're expecting us?" Harris shook his head. "I don't know, ma'am, but I'd recommend caution. If they are armed, we could be walking straight into a trap." The crew felt a ripple of tension. They had all trained for hostile encounters, but the idea that a civilization would be so ready to attack without provocation was unsettling. On most worlds, humans had learned that diplomacy, empathy, and medical aid often smoothed the path, but this planet didn't seem to respond to normal rules. There was something about it that made human approaches seem naive, even dangerous. As the Valiant approached the upper atmosphere, the planet came into clearer view. Jagged mountain ranges jutted out of thick forests, rivers glinted like silver threads, and patches of barren land hinted at natural disasters or human intervention. The atmosphere shimmered with energy that interfered with the ship's sensors. It was alive in a way that was almost threatening, as if the planet itself were aware of the intruders hovering above. In the mess hall, the crew tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. They ate in silence, each lost in thought, knowing that the mission ahead might change their lives forever. Sergeant Kale, the ship's head of security, leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. "I've seen a lot of worlds, but something about this one, it doesn't feel right. You can't tell me that's just the clouds or the storms." Hostile. Dr. Leora Chen, the chief medical officer, frowned. "Hostile how? You mean the species or the environment?" Kale shrugged. "Both. Something about the readings makes my gut scream danger, and my gut has saved my life more times than any scanner." Leora didn't respond. She was already thinking about the medical supplies, the quarantine procedures, and the protocols they'd have to follow if they encountered a civilization that didn't follow normal medical ethics. She had seen civilizations fight diseases with ruthlessness and sometimes treat humans as expendable, but even she felt a chill at the idea that this planet might not respond to care at all. Captain Voss called an emergency briefing. The senior officers gathered in the command center, the soft hum of the ship's engines filling the room. On the main screen, the planet rotated slowly, dark clouds swirling around jagged landscapes. Voss looked around at the faces of her crew, knowing the weight of what she was about to say. "We are entering orbit around a planet that is unlike any we've seen," she began. "Preliminary scans suggested it's heavily defended and the life forms there may not respond to diplomacy or medical assistance. Our usual protocols may not apply. This mission is no longer just exploration. It is survival." There was a moment of silence. The reality of her words sank in. Exploration had always come with risk, but usually, humanity had a chance to reason with others, to offer aid or negotiate. Here, those options seemed irrelevant. The Deathworlders, as the planet's inhabitants would soon be called, appeared to operate under rules entirely their own, and those rules seemed to favor combat over compassion. The Valiant entered orbit, scanning every inch of the surface with extreme caution. From the sensors, the crew could see movements, small, fast objects darting through the atmosphere, almost like swarms of birds, but with the precision of machinery. It was clear that the planet's inhabitants were monitoring them, analyzing their every move. This wasn't a random natural world. It was prepared for intruders. Lieutenant Harris pointed to the display. "Captain, those aren't storms. Those are ships or something like ships. They're moving in patterns that suggest they're defensive. We might not even get a chance to land before they know we're here." Voss nodded, the weight of command heavy on her shoulders. "Then we proceed carefully. No rash moves. Scan, observe, and report. Prepare all defensive systems. And remember, sending a medical team won't help here. These people, or whatever they are, respond to strength, not aid." As the hours passed, the crew watched from the observation decks. The planet's surface revealed more details. Vast fortresses carved into mountain ranges, bridges spanning rivers that glowed with energy, and lines of figures moving with incredible coordination. Every movement was purposeful, trained, and above all, aggressive in appearance. The crew realized that these weren't just soldiers, they were part of the culture that prioritized readiness for battle. Above all else, Dr. Chen and her team began discussing what medical support could even mean in such a context. Bandages, antibiotics, and vaccines were likely useless if the inhabitants didn't recognize injury in the same way humans did. Every procedure would have to be adapted for conditions that were entirely alien. And yet, the very idea of sending help seemed almost naive. They might as well be walking into the jaws of a predator in the ship's lounge. Sergeant Kale reviewed the tactical maps. "We can't even imagine what their weapons are capable of," he muttered. "They might hit us from orbit, or worse, on the surface. This is a world that treats every intruder as an enemy. No negotiations, no warnings, just attack." The tension on the Valiant was palpable. Every crew member understood that the story of this mission would be told in stark terms. Some worlds could not be explored with kindness alone. Some required the courage to face danger head, to match force with force. As night fell over the ship, the planet below was cloaked in darkness, but the lights of defensive installations glimmered faintly through the clouds. The crew could feel the silent challenge emanating from the surface. "You are not welcome here. Survival will not be easy." Captain Voss stood on the observation deck long after most of the crew had retired. She stared at the planet and whispered to herself, "We are not here to heal. We are here to survive. And we must be ready for anything." In that moment, the Valiant and its crew understood the truth of the Deathworlders. This was not a planet that sent doctors or negotiators. It was a planet that sent its warriors, and anyone who wanted to step foot on its surface would have to be prepared for war. The lesson was clear, stark, and terrifying, and the journey had only just begun. The tension on the Valiant grew heavier as the crew prepared for first contact with the Death. Everyone on board knew that this mission could be unlike anything they had ever experienced. The sensors had already picked up movements on the planet's surface, but no communication signals had been received in return. It was as if the Deathworlders were deliberately ignoring the humans, watching and waiting to see what they would do next. Captain Voss paced the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back. She had rehearsed countless scenarios in her mind, but none of them had prepared her for this. The rules of engagement were unclear. Traditional diplomacy might not work. Sending medical teams would be pointless. And yet, she knew they had a responsibility to try to communicate, to at least signal that they came in peace. Failure to act could provoke the worst possible response. Lieutenant Harris operated the communications array, sending repeated signals to the planet. The ship emitted a series of pulses, each one carefully coded with universal mathematical patterns, basic greetings, and even images showing the crew's intention for peaceful exploration. Hours passed. Nothing. The pulses bounced back as static, as if the planet itself refused to acknowledge them. "This is not normal," Harris muttered, his fingers hovering over the console. "Most civilizations, even the hostile ones, at least respond with a warning. This is silence. Complete silence." Dr. Leora Chen, who had been monitoring the ship's environmental and medical sensors, added, "Silence can be more dangerous than aggression. It means they are calculating, observing, deciding whether to attack, and we have no idea what triggers their response." The first sign of hostility came suddenly. A small, fast-moving object appeared on the sensors, streaking through the upper atmosphere of the planet. At first, the crew thought it was a natural phenomenon, a meteor or an atmospheric anomaly, but the object changed direction, mid-flight with deliberate precision. Then another appeared, and another. Before long, the sensors were filled with dozens of fast-moving shapes, all converging on the Valiant. "Captain," Sergeant Kale shouted, "they're not just watching us, they're attacking." Voss's face remained calm, but inside, her mind raced. "All stations, prepare for evasive maneuvers. Shields up, defensive weapons armed. Observe patterns, but do not engage unless fired upon." The attack craft swooped around the Valiant with incredible speed. They weren't firing yet, but the display showed targeting signals locking onto the ship. The crew realized that these were not random patrols, they were interceptors, trained to detect and target intruders. Any wrong move could trigger a barrage of weapons that the Valiant might not withstand. On the observation deck, the crew watched the Deathworlder ships with a mix of awe and fear. They were unlike any human designs, sleek, angular, and almost organic in shape. The vessels moved as if guided by instinct rather than programmed commands. Every movement was coordinated, precise, and threatening. Harris muttered under his breath, "They've never seen humans before, and they're treating us as enemies already." Captain Voss knew that sending a diplomatic team down to the planet's surface was now impossible. Any landing party would be seen as a threat and likely destroyed before making contact. She turned to Dr. Chen. "Medical support is out. There's no way we can land and help them. We can't even scan their injuries without provoking an attack." Leora nodded reluctantly. "I feared as much. This is not a world that responds to care. Their society, it's militarized at every level. Helping them is not an option, they won't allow it." As the hours passed, the Valiant attempted to maintain orbit while studying the planet's surface. The Deathworlders seemed to be observing the humans as intensely as the humans were observing them. Every move the Valiant made, every course correction, every light emitted from the ship was met with immediate adjustment by the interceptors below. It was a silent but unmistakable message: leave or face consequences. Then came the first strike. A beam of concentrated energy shot through the atmosphere toward a small unmanned research probe the Valiant had sent down earlier. The probe disintegrated instantly, leaving a trail of smoke and sparks. The crew watched in stunned silence. This was the moment they realized the planet's inhabitants did not hesitate to use lethal force. They didn't send warnings or medics. They deployed weapons. Sergeant Kale slammed his fist against the console. They just destroyed a probe. We need to respond before they get closer. Captain Voss shook her head. Not yet. Observation first. Any rash action could escalate this further. Our priority is understanding their patterns, their triggers. Survival comes first. The next few hours were a tense game of cat and mouse. The Deathworlder ships darted through the skies, sometimes approaching, sometimes retreating, testing the Valiant's movements. Every crew member on board felt the pressure. This was not a normal military encounter. The Deathworlders did not seem to operate under predictable rules. Their attacks were strategic, almost as if they were studying human reactions rather than simply trying to destroy the ship in the mess hall. The crew gathered to discuss what had just happened. Whispers filled the room, each speculation more unsettling than the last. "They're not just defensive," said one junior officer. "They're testing us, seeing how we react. That means every step we take is being monitored." Dr. Chen added quietly, "And that also means they may never allow peaceful contact. They respond only to strength. Anything that resembles weakness, like sending medical aid or diplomacy, might be seen as a threat to be eliminated." Lieutenant Harris, usually calm under pressure, ran simulations on his tablet. "I've tried to calculate possible responses. Every scenario ends with either destruction of the probe or escalation if we attempt communication. There's no middle ground with them." As the day turned into night aboard the Valiant, the crew began to notice something about the Deathworlders' strategy. The attacks were not random. The small craft always stayed within striking distance of the planet's surface. They never lingered too high or too far away. It was as if the inhabitants were confident that their planet itself was a fortress, and any intruder would be at a disadvantage no matter what they did. Captain Voss gathered her senior officers for another briefing. "We need to accept the reality," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Sending doctors, medics, or diplomats is not an option. Any attempt at peaceful contact could be interpreted as a threat and provoke further attacks. This planet responds to force. We must adjust our strategy accordingly." The implications were heavy. The crew had trained for hostile encounters, but always with the assumption that reason could prevail. Here, reason did not seem to exist. Every move had to be calculated. Every action weighed against the possibility of instant destruction. They were learning a harsh lesson. Some worlds could not be healed, negotiated with, or reasoned with. Survival depended entirely on readiness, vigilance, and the ability to respond decisively to threats. Then came the first close encounter. A Deathworlder fighter swooped down from the clouds, skimming the planet's surface, and fired a warning shot near the Valiant. The energy beam missed the ship by mere kilometers, sending a shock wave through space that rattled the hull. The crew froze, watching as the vessel disappeared back into the clouds. No words were spoken. The message was clear. Intruders were not welcome, and the Deathworlders would not hesitate to attack. Dr. Chen observed the readings from the fighter. "They move too fast, too precise. We cannot outmaneuver them with conventional tactics. Our options are limited. We must rely on shields, evasive maneuvers, and observation to survive." Over the next several days, the Valiant maintained orbit, trying to map the surface, study the movements, and understand the behavior of the Deathworlders. Every attempt at communication remained unanswered. Every probe sent to the surface was destroyed or captured. It became increasingly clear that the inhabitants had no interest in contact. They were warriors first, and everything else second. The crew grew weary. Sleep was interrupted by alarms and warnings. Meals were eaten in silence, broken only by the occasional update on enemy movements. Yet through the exhaustion, a grim determination settled in. They would survive. They would understand this world, and if necessary, they would defend themselves against a species that saw compassion as weaknesses. Captain Voss stood alone on the observation deck one night, staring at the planet's surface. The lights of the fortifications glimmered faintly through the clouds, a silent reminder of the threat below. "We came seeking knowledge," she whispered, "but we found war, and we must be ready." In that phase of their mission, the crew of the Valiant realized a chilling truth. First contact could be deadly. On Deathworld, no one sent doctors. No one offered peace. Only strength and preparedness ensured survival, and if they made a mistake, the consequences would be immediate and unforgiving. The days aboard the Valiant passed slowly, each moment stretching into hours of tense observation and quiet fear. The crew had learned one crucial lesson. The Deathworlders did not act like any species humans had encountered before. Their behavior was precise, deliberate, and completely alien. Every movement was calculated. as if the planet itself were an extension of their will. The human crew was beginning to understand that survival in this environment required more than technology or training. It demanded constant vigilance, patience, and the ability to anticipate actions that were sometimes incomprehensible. Captain Lena Voss spent most of her time on the bridge, watching the screens and analyzing the patterns of the enemy craft. The Deathworlders moved in squads, never alone, weaving through the clouds with a coordination that seemed instinctive rather than tactical. It was clear that they were not just defending their territory, they were testing the Valiant, learning the ship's weaknesses and the crew's behavior. Lieutenant Harris, the ship's lead analyst, had started mapping every maneuver of the Deathworlder craft. "It's almost like they are learning as they go," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. "Every time we try something new, evasive maneuvers, probe launches, they adjust immediately. It's not just intelligence, it's instinct, refined through experience." Sergeant Cale leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a grim expression on his face. "They're not soldiers in the way we understand soldiers. They fight as if combat is life itself. Injuries, disease, panic doesn't slow them down. Every action is focused on efficiency and survival. That's why sending medics or trying diplomacy is pointless. They're a society built entirely around conflict and strength." Dr. Leora Chen observed the readings from the Valiant's sensors with growing concern. "I've been tracking how they treat injuries within their forces," she explained. "Even when we catch glimpses of them after skirmishes, they do not stop fighting. They do not retreat to heal. Medical care, if it exists, is integrated into their combat systems. Healing and survival are inseparable from the battle itself." The realization hit the crew hard. In most civilizations humans had encountered, medicine and compassion were universal even among warriors. There were rules of engagement, and lives mattered. On this planet, that principle seemed entirely absent. Here, injury and death were parts of strategy, not consequences to avoid. The first real confrontation came when the Valiant attempted a orbit scan of a fortified region, near a mountainous area. The Deathworlders reacted almost instantly. Small, nimble ships descended from hidden launch points, attacking the Valiant with precision. This time, the humans could see the effects of their weapons. Energy beams struck parts of the ship, causing sparks and minor hull breaches, though the shields held firm. The crew scrambled to respond, trying evasive maneuvers while analyzing the attackers' tactics. "This isn't just a warning," Sergeant Cale shouted over the alarms. "They're showing us exactly what they're capable of. They want us to understand, but they're testing limits. One mistake, and we're done." Captain Voss nodded grimly. "Maintain orbit, defensive posture only, observe and record everything. We're learning about them. They're not going to give us mercy, but they will show their rules if we pay attention." Over the next several hours, the crew documented every attack pattern, noting how the Deathworlders combined speed, energy manipulation, and what appeared to be predictive targeting. Their weapons did not seem random. Each beam, each missile, was aimed with intent. They were calculating not just hitting the ship, but measuring reactions, testing shields, and adjusting strategies in real time. Dr. Chen explained what this meant for the humans' understanding of the planet's society. "Look at how they respond to stress and injury," she said, pointing to sensor readings. "Every individual is trained to continue functioning under conditions that would incapacitate most humans. Their physical endurance, mental focus, and recovery processes are all integrated with combat readiness. They are a civilization where survival depends entirely on fighting ability. There is no room for weakness," Harris added. "And it's not just physical. Observe their coordination. They communicate without visible signals, almost like a hive mind. Every maneuver complements the other. They anticipate our movements in ways we can't predict. It's terrifyingly efficient." The crew realized a chilling truth. The Deathworlders did not simply defend their territory. They integrated warfare into every aspect of life. Disease, injury, environmental hazards, all of these were managed in ways that humans could barely comprehend. There was no separation between health and strategy. Survival was a constant, active struggle, and the society's resources, technology, and knowledge were all dedicated to mastering that struggle one day. While the Valiant was observing a particularly fortified region, a small craft suddenly broke formation and flew directly toward the ship. The crew braced for attack, but instead of firing, the craft hovered briefly before retreating back toward the planet. The human crew watched in stunned silence. "They're testing us again," Harris muttered. "They're seeing how we react under pressure without engaging fully. It's almost a challenge." Captain Voss's voice was calm, but her mind raced. "Yes, and we must respond correctly. Panic or aggression could provoke a full-scale assault. Patience and observation are our only weapons right now." That night, the crew gathered in the mess hall, exhausted but tense, discussing the lessons of the day. "They don't act like humans," said one officer. "They don't follow rules or ethics we understand. We can't reason with them, negotiate with them, or help them. They only recognize strength and adaptability." Dr. Chen nodded. "I've been reviewing their response to simulated injuries. It's remarkable. Even when damaged, they continue coordinated attacks. Any human crew would be incapacitated by the same injuries. We are witnessing an entirely different approach to survival, one that merges physical endurance, strategic thinking, and relentless adaptation. Kale added, and the worst part, they don't just attack for the sake of fighting. Every move is calculated. Every strike has a purpose. This isn't chaos, it's a system. A society built for war from the ground up. We can't underestimate them, even for a second. As days passed, the crew began to notice subtle patterns in the Deathworlders' behavior. While they were aggressive and seemingly merciless, they followed a kind of code. They attacked with precision, avoiding unnecessary risk. They did not waste resources on frivolous destruction, and they did not attack blindly. The Valiant's sensors showed evidence of organized rotations, defensive layering, and coordinated retreats and advances. This civilization was harsh, but it was disciplined. Their brutality had purpose, and every action was measured against long-term survival. Captain Voss realized that understanding these patterns was crucial. We cannot defeat them, she said quietly during a briefing, but we can survive if we anticipate their logic. Our mission is not to conquer or negotiate, it is to observe, learn, and protect our crew. Every movement must be calculated, every decision precise. One mistake could cost lives. The crew worked tirelessly to adjust strategies, run simulations, and prepare for any eventuality. They practiced evasive maneuvers, tested shield capacities, and analyzed every aspect of the Deathworlders' behavior. Exhaustion set in, but determination drove them forward. They were learning the hard way that some civilizations could not be understood through empathy or compassion. They had to be respected through caution, readiness, and adaptability. One day, a larger formation of Deathworlder ships appeared, moving in tight formation across the clouds. The Valiant's sensors indicated that these ships were heavier, more advanced, and likely capable of significant destruction. The crew braced for another confrontation, but the formation did not attack. Instead, the ships circled the planet in a synchronized pattern, almost like a show of strength. Harris studied the readings. This is a demonstration. They're showing their capability without engaging directly. They want to intimidate us, to make it clear that intrusion has consequences. It's psychological warfare as much as it is physical, Dr. Chen added, and they are effective. The entire crew is tense, alert, and exhausted. They understand fear, discipline, and observational in one coordinated movement. We are witnessing a civilization whose very existence revolves around mastery of survival, combat, and strategic calculation. The crew of the Valiant had reached a new understanding. First, they acknowledged the raw power and discipline of the Death. Second, they recognized that traditional approaches, diplomats, negotiators, would fail completely. Third, they understood that survival depended entirely on careful observation, strategic patience, and the ability to act decisively when provoked. Captain Voss stood on the observation deck late at night, looking at the glowing formations on the planet below. The lights of the fortifications glimmered through the thick clouds, silent and imposing. "We have learned much," she whispered to herself. "We have seen the strength of a civilization unlike any other. Compassion does not rule here. Strength, vigilance, and adaptability are the only keys to survival, and if we are to leave this planet alive, we must respect that truth completely." In that phase of the mission, the crew had come to understand the harsh reality of Deathworld, a society where survival and warfare were inseparable, where medical care and diplomacy were secondary to strength, and where every moment was a test of endurance, intelligence, and courage. The Valiant's mission had evolved from exploration to survival, and the lessons they learned would define the rest of their encounter with this relentless alien world. The Valiant's crew had spent days observing the Deathworlders, analyzing their movements, and learning the harsh reality of this relentless civilization. But the longer they stayed in orbit, the more it became clear that observation alone would not ensure survival. The Deathworlders had already demonstrated their capability and their willingness to attack. Waiting passively was no longer an option. Captain Alina Voss knew that the next phase of their mission required action, calculated and decisive action, but action nonetheless. The first step was to understand the enemy's patterns. Lieutenant Harris worked tirelessly at the tactical console, running simulations of the Deathworlders' formations. He studied how the enemy ships reacted to evasive maneuvers, how quickly they could adapt to new threats, and how their strikes correlated with the Valiant's sensor readings. "Captain," he said one morning, his voice tight with concentration, "we've mapped several predictable behaviors. They always leave certain gaps in their formations when moving between zones. If we time it right, we can strike or move without being immediately detected." Voss nodded. "Good. That's our starting point. Kale, prepare the security teams. Dr. Chen, make sure the medical stations are ready for injuries. Even if we can't heal them, we need to be ready for our own." Sergeant Kale grunted. "Understood, but we both know they won't give us an easy fight. Any offensive or defensive move will be met with immediate retaliation. They're fast, precise, and ruthless." The Valiant's crew spent hours preparing, running drills, checking weapons, and reviewing every possible scenario. It was exhausting, but the discipline of preparation was their only chance. Every crew member understood that the Deathworlders did not see mercy or hesitation as options. They did not negotiate. They did not heal. They attacked, observed, and adapted. To survive, the humans had to adopt the same level of focus and adaptability. The first real engagement came when the Valiant tested the Deathworlders' defensive perimeter. By sending a small reconnaissance probe toward the mountainous region that appeared heavily fortified, the probe transmitted data for a brief moment before a streak of energy destroyed it. The crew observed the aftermath carefully. The destruction was precise, not reckless. The Deathworlders were teaching a lesson. Intrusion was unacceptable, and every movement would be noticed. Captain Voss called a meeting in the command center. "We've learned enough from observation," she said firmly. "Waiting is no longer enough. If we want to survive and gather meaningful intelligence, we must take calculated action. That means engaging strategically using our weapons, our shields, and our understanding of their behavior. We cannot afford mistakes." Harris leaned over the tactical display, tracing the patterns of the Deathworlder ships. "We can exploit the predictable gaps we've found. Their formations are nearly perfect, but they have brief moments of vulnerability when moving from one zone to another. We strike during those moments. We minimize risk. It won't guarantee safety, but it's our best chance." The Valiant prepared for the first tactical strike. Defensive shields were raised, weapon systems were online, and every crew member took their post. The ship moved carefully, slipping into the zone the Deathworlders had left temporarily unguarded. Within moments, the sensors lit up. Small craft from the enemy approached immediately, but with a slight delay that confirmed Harris's calculations. Now Voss commanded. Energy weapons fired, precise beams cutting through the enemy craft without overextending the Valiant's position. Explosions dotted the clouds, and for the first time the crew realized that they could make an impact if they acted strategically. The Deathworlders responded quickly, adjusting formations and returning fire. But the humans held their ground. Sergeant Cale barked orders to the security teams. "Keep shields strong. Fire only when necessary. Watch their patterns. They adapt fast." Dr. Chen monitored the crew, ensuring that no one was injured beyond the ship's ability to treat them. "They're calculating our reaction times," she muttered. "Every strike we make, every defensive move, they analyze it instantly. Be ready for sudden changes." The engagement lasted hours. Each move by the Valiant was met with countermeasures by the Deathworlders, but the humans had learned patience and precision. They avoided rash maneuvers, minimized exposure, and focused on survival while collecting critical data. By the end of the encounter, several enemy craft had been disabled, and the Valiant remained intact. In the aftermath, the crew gathered to review the events. Harris analyzed the data, pointing out the subtle behaviors of the Death. "They are efficient. They do not attack recklessly. They study and adapt. We have to respect their intelligence, but we also need to exploit what we know. Every strike we make must be calculated, every movement deliberate. We cannot let emotion dictate our actions." Captain Voss agreed. "This is the reality of dealing with Deathworlders. They respond only to strength and calculated moves. Compassion, hesitation, or mercy will not save us. Our survival depends on strategy, precision, and understanding their rules, even if those rules are brutal." Over the next several days, the Valiant continued to engage in cautious tactical maneuvers, testing the Deathworlders' reactions, mapping defenses, and observing weaknesses. The crew learned to predict the enemy's behavior, using every bit of knowledge gathered to survive each encounter. Small victories were achieved not through overwhelming force, but through intelligence, discipline, and adaptability. During a particularly tense operation, the Valiant attempted to retrieve data from a surface installation using a specialized drone. The Deathworlders responded immediately, launching interceptors and energy strikes aimed at the drone. The crew watched with bated breath as the drone dodged, maneuvered, and completed its mission, proving that patience and calculated risk could achieve objectives even in hostile territory. Sergeant Cale smiled grimly. "We're learning their game. Not winning it, not yet, but understanding it. And that's something we didn't have before." Dr. Chun nodded. "And we're learning about their approach to survival. Even the injured on their side are treated as combatants first. They do not abandon or delay for healing. Their society has no room for weakness. It's a lesson we can't ignore." Captain Voss knew the stakes had changed. This was no longer exploration in a traditional sense. The mission had evolved into survival and strategy. Every decision, every movement, every deployment of crew or technology had to account for the Deathworlders' brutal efficiency. Late one night, after a day of engagements, Voss walked alone on the observation deck. The planet below was alive with lights and movement, an endless display of coordination and readiness. "We cannot underestimate them," she whispered. "But we also cannot be paralyzed by fear. Strategy, patience, precision, those are our weapons now. And if we follow them, we survive. If we falter, we die." The crew had achieved a significant understanding of the Deathworlders. They had learned that observation alone was insufficient. Calculated action was essential. The enemy's strength lay not just in weapons, but in discipline, strategy, and adaptability. and survival depended entirely on the humans' ability to match that precision without hesitation. The Valiant had moved from passive observation to active engagement. They had survived their first real tactical encounters, gained critical knowledge, and discovered the true nature of a civilization where combat and survival were inseparable. The lesson was clear. On Deathworld, hesitation was fatal, and only the prepared, the strategic, and the disciplined could hope to endure. After days of intense observation, careful maneuvers, and tactical engagements, the crew of the Valiant knew that their time in orbit around the Deathworld could not continue indefinitely. The Deathworlders had proven their capabilities, and it was only a matter of time before any mistake could lead to catastrophic loss. Captain Elena Voss called an urgent meeting with her senior officers to discuss the next steps. "We have learned more than we could have imagined," she said. "We understand their strength, their discipline, and their way of life. But we cannot stay here any longer. Survival is our priority. We must plan an exit strategy that keeps the ship and crew intact." Lieutenant Harris studied the tactical displays, tracing the positions of the Deathworlder craft. "They have us mapped almost perfectly," he said. "Any abrupt movement could trigger a full-scale attack, but we have patterns now. They respond predictably when we make certain maneuvers. If we exploit those patterns carefully, we can create an opportunity to leave without being destroyed." Sergeant Cale leaned over the console, tension written clearly on his face. "It won't be easy. They're not going to let us just fly away. Their ships are faster, more agile, and they know the terrain better than we ever could. Every move has to be precise, or we risk losing everything." Dr. Leora Chen added, "And even if we survive the flight, we must be ready for casualties. Injuries are inevitable in situations like this. Our medical teams have done everything they can to prepare. But this is not a situation where we can heal easily or retreat to safety. We have to be ready for anything." Captain Voss nodded. "Understood. We leave in 2 hours. All crew, double-check equipment, shields, weapons, and communication systems. Harris, prepare a sequence of maneuvers that maximizes speed and minimizes exposure. Cale, ensure security teams are ready for boarding contingencies. Dr. Chen, prepare the medbay and triage teams. Every detail matters. Survival depends on precision and coordination." The hours before departure were tense. Crew members moved swiftly but silently through the corridors, performing checks, securing equipment, and mentally preparing for what lay ahead. The Valiant had already survived multiple skirmishes, but leaving the orbit of the Deathworld was arguably the most dangerous moment of all. One misstep, one miscalculation, and the ship could be destroyed instantly. That as the Valiant moved into its departure position, the crew on the bridge watched the planet below. Jagged mountains, sprawling fortresses, and the faint glimmer of energy weapons highlighted the danger of every moment. The Deathworlders, fully aware of the humans' presence, began moving their ships into patterns that suggested preparation for a potential chase. Every crew member held their breath, knowing that the next few hours could determine the fate of the entire mission. "Engage departure sequence," Captain Voss commanded. The Valiant's engines roared to life, and the ship began a calculated ascent, following the exact path Harris had determined. The Deathworlders reacted instantly, sending interceptors in precise formations to test the humans' reaction. The bridge crew watched in tense silence, each movement critical. The slightest deviation from their plan could trigger a violent response. Sergeant Cale barked instructions: "Shields up, evasive maneuvers at 5-second intervals. Watch the blind spots." The Valiant moved with deliberate precision, each maneuver carefully timed to exploit gaps in the Deathworlder formations. Energy beams streaked past the ship, missing narrowly as the crew executed every adjustment with practiced skill. The Deathworlders attacked with intent, but their predictability, combined with Harris's analysis, allowed the humans to stay just ahead of danger. Despite the tension, moments of clarity emerged. Crew members worked together seamlessly, their training and discipline allowing them to adapt instantly to sudden attacks. Dr. Chen and her medical teams monitored vital signs, ensuring that stress and minor injuries did not compromise the crew's performance. Harris continuously recalculated trajectories, adjusting their path to exploit new openings in the enemy's formations. Hours passed in this delicate dance between predator and prey. The Deathworlders continued to test the Valiant, sending waves of interceptors and coordinated attacks, but the humans matched each strike with precision, patience, and adaptability. For the first time, the crew realized the full extent of their growth and resilience under extreme pressure. They had become not just observers of this alien civilization, but participants in a deadly game that demanded intelligence, discipline, and courage at every turn. At one point, a larger formation of Deathworlder ships moved to block the Valiant's path. The tension on the bridge was palpable. Harris quickly analyzed the situation. "They're committing to the interception, but there's a weak point on the left flank. If we adjust our vector by 3 degrees and accelerate in short bursts, we can slip through without major damage." Captain Voss made the decision instantly. "Do it. Execute the maneuver." The Valiant shifted its trajectory, engines surging as the ship moved through the narrow gap. Energy beams streaked past, scraping the shields but causing no serious damage. The crew held their breath as the ship emerged from the zone, leaving several pursuing craft behind. The first major hurdle had been overcome. Sergeant Cale allowed himself a brief sigh of relief. "That was close," he muttered. "But we're not out yet." Dr. Chen reminded the crew, "Stay focused. We've survived the first wave, but stress and fatigue can compromise judgment. Keep alert. We cannot afford mistakes." As the Valiant continued its ascent, the Deathworlders launched one final coordinated strike. This attack was more intense, combining multiple energy beams, rapid interceptors, and attempts to cut off the ship's escape routes. The bridge crew worked in perfect synchronization, each member performing their role flawlessly. Shields absorbed the brunt of the energy strikes, while weapons and countermeasures disrupted incoming attackers. The tension was unbearable. Every second counted. Harris adjusted vectors continuously, Cale coordinated defensive teams, and Dr. Chen monitored the crew's physical and mental state. Captain Voss remained calm, her voice steady as she issued orders, guiding the ship through the most dangerous phase of their mission. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the Valiant broke through the upper layers of the planet's atmosphere. The Deathworlders remained below, unable to follow the ship into the higher orbit. The crew allowed themselves a moment of cautious relief. They had survived, against overwhelming odds, using strategy, discipline, and precision. Once safely in higher orbit, Captain Voss called another meeting with her senior officers. "We made it," she said quietly, her voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. "We survived not by luck, but by understanding, preparation, and careful execution. We have learned more about this civilization than any previous mission could have provided. But the lesson is clear. On Deathworld, survival is not given, it is earned through vigilance, intelligence, and strength." Harris nodded. "We've mapped their formations, documented their behavior, and gathered critical intelligence. We now know the rules of engagement, their strategies, and the harsh reality of their society. It's invaluable data, but it came at a cost. Every move had to be precise. One wrong step, and we would not be here to analyze it." Sergeant Cale added, "We've survived because we adapted. They expected hesitation, they expected fear. We gave them discipline, strategy, and calculated moves. That's the only way to survive on their world." Dr. Chen spoke softly, "And we've seen the truth about their approach to life and survival. Compassion, mercy, or medical aid would not have worked. They integrate survival and warfare at every level. That's something we must remember in every encounter going forward. Humanity cannot impose its rules on a civilization like this." As the Valiant set course for home, the crew reflected on their experiences. They had come to explore, to understand, and perhaps to communicate. Instead, they had been forced to confront the brutal reality of a civilization entirely dedicated to survival through combat. Every skill they had learned, every discipline they had trained for, had been tested to the extreme. They had survived, not because the Deathworlders were merciful, but because the humans had adapted faster, thought strategically, and acted decisively. Captain Voss stood on the observation deck, staring at the planet shrinking in the distance. The swirling clouds, jagged mountains, and glimmers of energy installations were reminders of the peril they had faced. "We leave with knowledge," she whispered to herself, "and with a lesson we will never forget. On some worlds, compassion does not save lives. Strength, vigilance, and strategy do, and that is the reality of the universe." The crew had learned the ultimate lesson of their mission. They had survived encounters that would have been fatal to any unprepared explorers. They had observed a society where survival, combat, and discipline were inseparable, and they had adapted sufficiently to escape with their lives and critical intelligence. The story of the Valiant's encounter with the Deathworlders would become a cautionary tale. Some worlds cannot be healed with diplomacy or medicine. On certain planets, survival is earned only through strength, precision, and unwavering focus. The Valiant continued its journey home, the crew quietly processing their experiences. There was relief, certainly, but also a deep respect for the civilization they had encountered. They had seen the harshest realities of survival and warfare, and they had lived to tell the story. In the vast universe, not every world offered mercy, and not every civilization could be reasoned with. But the humans had adapted, survived, and learned lessons that would guide them for the rest of their lives. And as the stars stretched out before them, Captain Voss allowed herself a moment of reflection. "We came seeking knowledge," she whispered, "and we found life at its most disciplined, most relentless, and most unforgiving. We leave wiser, stronger, and more prepared, and that is all we can ask."